John's article, it was just a short piece about a survey that came out recently, and in that survey they asked a whole bunch of people, what part of government do you trust, or do you believe will be is most effective? And without a doubt, 2/3 to 1/3, local and state government is more effective than federal government. And this is the population of America. Republicans, Democrats, Independents, women, men, young and old, all have much more faith in the effectiveness of state and local government. And then when you look at, and in talking to some of the people, the responses were things like, well, the stuff that happens in Washington doesn't really affect my life, but the things that happen here locally really affect my business and my day-to-day operations and the way things happen here in my city. That's actually much more effective, and I think they're better at what they do. They seem to have more competence. So the American people really do believe more in state and local government, and even if you drill down further into that, they have more faith in state and local businesses and charities having much more positive impact than a government can. So the message that we're actually trying to communicate, which is that go to your charities, go to your businesses for shaping your community, use government as little as possible, and when you do use government, use the most local, smallest, closest level government that can possibly address your needs. That message actually is at the heart of the majority of Americans. We know this, we live it, we believe it, and when you ask us, we will answer those questions. But because of media culture and being a big country, the one thing we all have in common is we have the same president and we have the same Washington idiots to talk about, just like we all have the same Beyonce and Kardashians to talk about. So that's what we talk about a lot, but what we genuinely believe in and care about and trust is state and local government, businesses, and charities. So the conservative movement, we have an audience out there that believes in what we're saying if we can say it in a more effective way. I don't exactly know how we're trying to get better at that, but we do need to understand that our audience really is receptive to what we have to say. They just may not know it yet.
Well, that kind of brings to mind something I was thinking about earlier today. We're not going to get into it, but Paul Ryan we'll probably talk about it next week. Paul Ryan has an anti-poverty plan that he's been working on for a couple years now, and there's a film that's going to be coming out. Well, I say film, it's a series of videos coming out about his plan that it's called Comeback, and they released the trailer for that, and it was very interesting looking at it, listening to the people who were talking about poverty. A lot of them were talking about local solutions and local-based entities that know and that care and that see what goes on and that can recognize that. And that made me think of something else. When we're talking about poverty, local entities do a lot. We see, soup kitchens, we see food pantries, we see shelters, things like that are funded a lot at the local level by private donations or churches or whatever. But when we're talking about immigration and specifically illegal immigration or people who've overstayed their visas, work permit, the whole Executive Amnesty business, that is a national giant federal monster sitting on people's back. And I wondered if in using that local angle, using the trusted local angle, if we could say things like, oh, we'd be very happy to deal with, finding work for people who come here looking for a better life, once we've taken care of these vulnerable people in our society who haven't had educational advantages, who haven't had economic advantages, who've been disadvantaged just by where they are geographically. And if we could look at, as a movement, as the right, taking on poverty as an issue broadly. We don't talk about it often, but Paul Ryan and some of the other people that are on the national stage have been doing it. But if we started talking poverty on a consistent way, looking back to things we've talked about before, like Arthur Brooks and everything with the American Enterprise Institute, if we start talking about that, poverty, and contrast that with the influx of cheap labor that this administration is attempting to bring in. I think there's a wedge there in the middle of that whole left constituency, Democrat constituency, that we can start driving through without costing us anything.
Absolutely. I think that's I mean, we've talked about this before on the show, that there's definitely some room there, particularly in African American communities, where, you know, when you have an unemployment rate that's so incredibly high that, you know, an influx of new cheap labor is huge.
An unemployment rate in those particular areas, whatever they're saying on the national level, you take that number from the local statistics or the minority statistics. How many black men are unemployed in, say, Chicago? And you focus on those things, and you say we would be happy to deal with the issue of finding jobs for people who come here and eventually become citizens or at least legal residents. But we have a very pressing need to help these people in our communities right now who are dealing with high poverty in their areas. You know, the left has talked about food deserts and bad educational opportunities. I'm all for co-opting some of those issues. Ask for that source. Say, you know, the truth matters to me. You know, you can spin it that way, but I'm really interested in what the facts are here. If we just keep coming at it that way, maybe we might take some of the wind out of the sails for some of these guys. I don't know. Maybe I'm too optimistic, but I'd like us to get that reputation for being truth seekers.